In 1922, beneath the crumbling foundations of a sunken library in Alexandria, Egypt, archaeologists pulled a charred wooden casket from layers of ash and silt. Inside, wrapped in oiled linen, was a single papyrus scroll. Its edges were singed black by the same fire that destroyed the Great Library 1,700 years prior. But at its center, pressed deep into the fiber, was an emblem, a compass crossed with a scythe, wrapped in a spiral that never ends. That was the first physical trace of the name whispered across 2,000 years of hidden history. The Cartographers of Chaos. What if every global crisis, every era of upheaval and collapse was never random? What if it was a meticulously planned step by an unseen hand, a hidden design? Centuries in the making, guiding humanity through cycles of destruction and rebirth. Today we follow the paper trail, the carved symbols, and the coded manuscripts to unpack the whispered history of the order that may not have made history, but may have mapped it. In October of 1347, 3 Genoese trading ships limped into the port of Messina, Sicily. Most of their crew were already dead, their bodies swollen and blackened with buboes. The port authorities turned them away, but it was already too late. The Black Death had arrived in Europe. Over the next 4 years, it wiped out 1/3 of the continent's population. Villages were left ghost towns. Fields turned to wilderness. Nobles and peasants died the same death, side by side. It was one of the worst catastrophes in human history. And to the cartographers, it was a pruning. 3 years before the first ship docked in Sicily, a parchment was quietly filed away in a monastery in Marseille. It bore no author name, only the spiral compass mark. It listed 3 port cities, 3 autumns, and 1 phrase: the weak will be culled, the strong will rebuild. Their map was never of physical lands. It was a map of societal fault lines, economic strain, resource depletion, overcrowding, the rot of complacent ruling classes. They could see the preconditions for collapse long before it arrived. They did not unleash the plague. They simply saw the storm coming and made sure the sails were set to ride it or to capsize exactly when needed. What followed proved their thesis. When the plague receded, labor was scarce. Serfs could demand wages, land, and rights. The old feudal order cracked at the foundations. A new merchant class rose from the ashes, carrying with it the seeds of the Renaissance, the age of discovery, and the modern world. To the cartographers, this was never a tragedy. It was a reset, brutal, unforgiving, and necessary. But the order would not stay united. 12 years after the Black Death faded in 1361, a secret gathering was held in a vaulted cellar beneath a Florentine palazzo. For 3 days, two factions argued over the future of their work. One faction, the Watchers, clung to the old code. They were observers and calibrators. Human civilization was a delicate clock. To force its hands would shatter it entirely. They would nudge, they would map, but they would never push. The other faction, the accelerators, disagreed. Natural cycles were too slow, they argued. Human complacency stretched eras of stagnation out for centuries. The reset could come faster. It could be sharper. It could be engineered through manufactured wars, engineered famines, engineered panics to deliver a stronger, more purified rebirth sooner. The argument ended without resolution. By dawn, the accelerators had vanished into the night, taking with them half the maps, half the codes, and half the network. This is why the historical trail grows messy after the 14th century. There were not one cartographers of chaos, but two. Two hands drawing on the same map at different speeds with different end goals. One watching, one pushing. In 1789, the same year the French Revolution ignited, workers renovating an abandoned noble palazzo on Venice's Grand Canal made a discovery. Behind a bricked-up fireplace in a lead-lined box were 12 bound volumes of calfskin parchment, written in a strange hybrid of classical Greek, alchemical cipher, and a private symbolic alphabet. The manuscript was eventually catalogued in the restricted archives of the Biblioteca Nazionale Marciana in Venice, under the reference number Mislat 14237. To this day, fewer than 10 scholars have been granted full access to its pages. It took 2 decades to fully decode. What it revealed was not prophecy, it was a sociological formula so cynical, so precise, that it reads like a playbook for the last 250 years of human history. It predicted the Industrial Revolution not as a miracle of innovation, but as a predictable next step in humanity's self-destructive arc. It described in chilling detail the side effects to come. Mass migration into stone and iron cities, where sunlight would be blocked by factory smoke and the human spirit would fray under the roar of machines. The rise of global financial markets, where wealth would exist as numbers on paper, and entire nations would collapse when those numbers shifted. The systematic depletion of the planet's natural resources, as competition and greed outpaced restraint, setting the stage for global friction over what remains. Most unsettling of all, it did not list these as outcomes to be avoided. It listed them as milestones on the path to the next great reset. The cartographers never needed to plant bombs or assassinate leaders. Their operation was far more elegant and far more insidious. They made sure that every time humanity reached a peak of growth, every time a system grew large and vulnerable, the philosophy of inevitable decline was already there, embedded in books, in politics, in popular thought. They did not push us off the cliff. They simply convinced us that the ground far below is a necessary new beginning. Today, we scroll through headlines on our screens: financial crashes, political polarization, climate instability, a quiet, pervasive sense that things are falling apart. We feel powerless to stop it. We call it the way of the world. That is the true, lasting legacy of the cartographers of chaos, if they ever existed at all. They were never a secret society pulling strings from a hidden bunker. They did not need to be. Their greatest weapon was an idea, the idea that destruction is not an anomaly, but a fundamental, even necessary part of human progress. That peace is unnatural. That stability is stagnation. That every golden age must end in fire. That idea seeped into the halls of power. It seeped into economics textbooks, into political speeches, into the stories we tell ourselves about history. It seeps into you every time you read about a crisis and think, Well, that's just how the world works. We are not controlled by them, but we might be unwittingly guided by their principles. Every time we accept decline as inevitable, every time we give up on the idea of lasting peace, every time we tell ourselves that you have to break something to make something better, perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether the cartographers were real. It is whether, right now, we are all unconsciously picking up their pen and drawing the next lines on their map of chaos. At the end of the day, no one can prove the Cartographers of Chaos ever existed as a real organization. They might be nothing more than a 2,000-year-old philosophical thought experiment, a pattern our brains invent to make sense of a random and messy world. But here is what we do know. If they were real, if there ever was a hand guiding us through cycles of collapse, the one thing they would never want you to do is notice the pattern, to question the cycle, to imagine a world that does not have to rise and fall and burn and rebuild forever. A map only has power if you follow it. If you put it down and walk a different path, it is just paper and ink. If this deep dive into hidden history and forgotten ideas fascinated you, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more untold stories. Drop a comment below. Where do you think the cartographers would draw their next line? In our modern world? And more importantly, do you think we have the power to erase it?